parents? Yeah, it is just pretty much sleeping.
Yeah.
They're still eating.
Hey there.
Right. She's kind of lingering.
Well, that's what he said.
We'll try to
Yeah.
That's where it's still.
My mom's doing pretty well. She's feeling pretty good. Yeah.
I started one. Where did we find the recording from last?
Changes daily, does it?
Yeah, it does.
I've asked Mary, because she talks, I asked Mary to send out the link.
He's doing this kind of thing. He's just coasting
From
along
last
the transition, the hospice
Okay,
nurses.
so I'm not sure where it is.
So
It's in the cloud somewhere.
I don't know where they've been storing it, so.
I know, I heard him say last
I thought he
week,
would be
recording in
gone.
crowd. Yeah.
I'm really surprised.
Yeah.
Pretty good to go?
Are you able to converse?
Not a lot. He'll wake
It's
up.
me and Shelby if anything goes on. Yes, yeah.
I stopped telling him goodbye.
Did you?
Just goes back to sleep. He doesn't want me to go, so I have to. I can't say that.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure the hospice nurses are fully immersion people and can kind of guide you. I've never had that experience where a loved one's been in hospice.
Okay, yeah. Both his mom was, his dad wasn't, but his mother was in hospice. Went through that with her.
Yeah.
My mom is getting ready to start palliative care. Well, it's just, you know, then once she
Couple more
leaves
minutes to get
hospice, she's
started.
already in the system.
Oh, okay.
So they'll go and just kind of check in with her and see how she's doing.
Is she in a place of residence?
Yeah, she's in assisted living with Matthews Glen.
Yeah.
They were there together.
Yeah.
And he's in skilled nursing.
Okay.
So they're not in the same building anymore.
Yeah.
But she goes and sees him pretty much every day. Yeah. Where she's in dialysis 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So she's,
Yeah. It's gotta be hard.
she won't linger though. Once dialysis is not working anymore, she probably won't.
That's like getting this up.
Is that right?
Once your kidneys fail, yeah.
Well, sorry, very sorry.
So it could be they go pretty quickly together, right?
Yeah, I think 64 years of marriage and they're, yeah.
Wow.
So,
Well, as we gather up here, if you want to sign in
Right,
online,
we know.
you go to your Realm Connect, and from Realm Connect, if you were here last week, it might just pop up, but you would go to check-in. How you doing, Steve?
See you outside riding around. I should.
You're like,
I'm gonna go ahead and book tickets for next Wednesday. Grab you if they go walk. This is doing. Walk.
sign in, go to Realm Connect,
Walk last night. Did you? I walked over to school, see what's going on.
Mine is just spinning.
How do you do it?
Wrote,
Where's the check-in?
poured all down.
I got that thing.
I just
Do
filled
the
it.
dot.
So they just.
Oh, check in.
So mine's just spinning.
Mine's just spinning.
Mine too.
Mine says, did you check me?
Yes.
Oh.
Where were
Why did you tell me? I'm right here, but I'm doing
I checked you in, that's what you were doing.
Where
I'm over here trying to get tickets for next week.
Check-in on that. Once you get to that stuff.
The dot.
Oh, the dot.
I might be checking.
How are you doing?
Gotcha. There we go. Did you get it? Go to the dot.
Here?
And then the class. Yeah.
It's just spinning away.
hold on.
Back to the
You feel included now? What's gonna be crazy for us, I'm reading out of Sweden.
Okay, so that's why.
Maybe that was one. Opening KRN.
What day?
Get things done.
Check, we'll register for next week.
All right, let's get started here. Good to see everybody online that's joining us. Something I didn't do last week is to do some quick introductions, because we have some people online that don't live nearby, but they're going to be traveling with us and they want to get connected. So we'll do it out here as well. So let's go around. How about the Reinhards? You guys go first.
Go ahead, Kathy.
We're Jim and Kathy. We live in Hendersonville. It was 49 degrees this morning and the leaves are starting to turn. So cold. But we're looking forward to this trip. Our daughter and her husband live in Charlotte, and they've been longtime attendees of Christ Lutheran.
All right, how about you, Jean?
Jean Linke. I live in Sun City, South Carolina, and I did go to Israel in 2019, but I wanted to hear more.
All right, Rick and Gail?
Hi, we live in the north side of Charlotte, so it's about a 40-minute drive for us. So we really appreciate the Zoom meeting. Looking forward to going to Israel with the group.
Yeah. And from California, the Layfields?
Hi, it's Dale and Susan. And yeah, we're looking forward to this also. You know, we've been to Israel, I think it was over 10 years ago, and we kind of really interested in going back now that we can kind of, you know, take it with more detail. So I appreciate, Scott, that you're going through all this study, because I think.
All right. Rose up a little bit. How about you, Cindy?
Hi, I'm Cindy Brown, and I am here in Charlotte also, not quite so far away, but with work, oftentimes not able to make it by 6. So Zoom option is amazing for me. My husband has been working in Raleigh a few nights a week, so he's not here, but both he and I are very interested in Israel. It's a bucket list trip for us. We're not on this one in November, but it's definitely something that we want to do, and we both feel that we need a whole lot more education before we're ready to go. So this class is just fantastic.
Good deal, thank you. And the Huddles, where are you guys?
We're in Richmond, Virginia, so we're a ways off too. Not as far as California, but we're looking forward to it. Very much, certainly appreciate the Zoom option, and enjoyed what you went over last week.
And we learned about the trip from Celia and Tal Owen.
Yeah, and sometimes we're going to have choir conflicts, so we maybe have to leave a little early on, not tonight, but.
Okay. All right, the Talbies.
Okay, unmute. Debbie's coming over to my side of the table. Tom and Debbie Tobby, we live down in Mint Hill, so it's a bit of a drive up to church, and with work and that, Zoom makes a much more sense, much easier to get to. So we've Israel's always been on our bucket list, so now we get to go.
Good deal. All right. And Tammy. Tam, there she is.
Hi. I'm here for the history.
Are you in Wilmington?
I am in Wilmington.
All right. Good, you can join us then. And Larry Gates? Oh, same thing. There's a connection.
Good evening, everyone. This is Larry
You guys
Gates.
having a fight? You okay?
Yeah. You got me?
Right. And then Dan. Who's Dan?
Howard.
The Dan Howard?
He's incognito.
He was gonna Zoom, I don't know.
All right, and Becky's on too. Hey, Becky.
Hey, guys.
Good deal. And here's everybody. All right, we got the whole gang here. Well, let's start with the movie. For those who went to the movie, any kind of comment about it, or what'd you think?
It really gave you a good impression of what it's gonna be like.
Yeah.
So my question is, are we gonna be traveling Route 60?
I gotta think we're gonna be on Route 60. That's the major highway.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but I gotta think we are.
But the movie was very well done and got a good sense of the distances. You know, I appreciate as they were moving down towards Jerusalem, that they would tell you how far away they were. Really give you a sense of how small that country is, really.
Yeah. And as they panned it around, you can see it's desert. You know, this is not the Fertile Crescent. It's pretty bare at places. And when we get over by the Dead Sea, it's going to be even more desolate over there. What else? Other comments?
What movie are you referring to?
Route 16.
60.
Big difference. Route 60 is the major highway that bisects Israel. And Mike Pompeo and some Jewish counterparts, their political religious leader, they took us to a lot of the major, it's a limited showing. It was over Stonecrest and a couple other places, Monday and Tuesday. And you said they extended it even tonight because they were all sold out. Yeah, it was good. Thought that looked out well. All right, so take a look at your map. I put some maps on the table. There were some comments I couldn't see it very well. I will share screen. Now I gotta call it up here. Share screen. There's a lot of. Here it is. There we go. All right. Now, that Route 60 that they were talking about went from this Nazareth area straight down. They took us to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, and down to Beersheba. That was that. So they didn't hit some things. They didn't hit like the Dead Sea, didn't hit Tel Aviv, but they hit that main drag that went right down there. Now, with this map, I wanted to add a couple of things that this map didn't have. So, we're going to take a look at Caesarea Philippi tonight, and that is about right here. It's a very northern part of Israel, Caesarea Philippi. It's not a modern city anymore. And then we looked at Cana yesterday with that the marriage feast, and that's pretty close to Nazareth. Jesus lived in Nazareth and he walked over for the wedding. So that's between Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee there, or Lake Tiberias. Mount Carmel is not on here. So you see Haifa there on the left, on the west side, just below that. That's where Mount Carmel is. And we'll be going to that first day. Now, if you were to draw a line, you see like Haifa here in the red, and you draw a line all the way across to the Jordan, and then go down and draw a line right across from Tel Aviv over to the West Bank. That area in between is Samaria, ancient Samaria. This is the place where we talked about in 722 BC, Assyria came and attacked the northern kingdom. And as they attacked the northern kingdom, that included the 10 of the 12 tribes. And then, you know, they talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Well, if you're a Mormon, they went over to the United States. If you're the rest of us, they were just kind of infiltrated within the Assyrian culture. So Samaria here, by the time Jesus comes, 700 years after the conquest, the area is called Samaria. And this is made up of Jewish people who are from Samaria. And you know from the stories of the Good Samaritan that the other Jews don't like the Samaritans, and the Samaritans don't like the other Jews, even though they're all Jewish. And what's going on there is because in 722, when the Assyrians came down, these Jewish people intermarried with the Assyrians. And so if you're Harry Potter fans, these are Muggles. These are inbreeds, that married with the Assyrians. That's why at the time of Jesus, the Samaritans and the other Jews didn't like each other. So I asked you to put a line across there because you find out that Jesus lived in the north there with that Sea of Galilee by Nazareth. And when anybody had to go from north to south, they would actually cross over the Jordan River like that. Then they would walk south, and then they would come over to Jerusalem. In other words, they wouldn't take the simplest, most direct route, because that would take you through the Samaritan area. And we don't want anything to do with them, except the time that Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well. But that's going to be right in the middle there. All right. Those are the things just to update in the map. Now, let's go back, stop sharing. We'll go back to our PowerPoint. Go back down here a little bit. And we'll share. All right. So, this is what we covered last week. We got to share a screen, don't we? Oh, here it is. There we go. Now I can hit this. Come on. How's that? That's it. All right, now we're going to share a screen. Last week, this is for those maybe weren't here. After breakfast, we traveled by private coach along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea to Caesarea, where the Galileans heard the good news from Peter. We talked about that last week. Now, there's a lot of Caesareas around this area. Because at Caesarea are cities dedicated to Caesar. To Caesar. So there's a lot of Caesareas around. Later on, we're going to get to Caesarea Philippi. That's the one in the far north. But Caesarea here, where the Gentiles first heard the good news from Peter and were baptized. This is the one with the, Peter has that vision of that net coming down with all the things that he could eat, and so then he preaches to the Gentiles. We see the Roman amphitheater and aqueduct, and I had an interesting article here from Dale Layfield, who's online here, that these Harvard and MIT PhD people have been looking at the concrete that the Romans used to build all these things, and asking the question, why is their concrete still around and our concrete crumbles after a decade or a generation or two? And what was the answer, Dale? Do you remember? Can you give us there in the thumbnail?
Yeah, the thumbnail is they thought it was, impurities. They thought they were sloppy in making the concrete, but it turned out that this year MIT discovered that no, it wasn't sloppy concrete. It actually had some lime particulates in it, some chunks of lime that actually created a sort of a self-healing cement. So when a crack started, it would hit these lime particles, and they would crystallize, and they would they would start mixing with the rest of the concrete, and you had a self-healing concrete. So turned out they were smarter than we thought.
So we're going to be seeing these 2,000-year-old Roman structures made out of their concrete that's actually still around here today. All right, we moved to Mount Carmel. We talked about that last week. And this coming Sunday, that's the text for worship. Discuss the reason why the prophets chose that place. The lessons we learned afterwards. Afterwards, we go to Nazareth. Nazareth is a know-nothing of a town. It is, it's never even mentioned in the Old Testament. It is really an insignificant town. And if it weren't for Jesus growing up there, we as Christians wouldn't even have that on our kind of awareness. Where we visit the Basilica of the Annunciation, the Church of St. Joseph. We end our day with a visit to Cana in Galilee, where Jesus performed his first miracle. All right? So we talked about that abundance, 180 gallons of wine, the abundance there. And did you guys get the itinerary for the hotels too?
Yes.
And I was pleasantly surprised that we're going to be staying in hotels multiple nights, rather than every day we have to pack up and go and reestablish camp. So it's gonna work out really well. That's a much better trip. All right, so that was last week. And we're gonna get the recording from last week and the recording for today, and we'll be sending that out to everybody in case you missed the one from last week. Mary's working on that one. All right, so we got the detailed map, got that. This is today. We start our day with a visit to Caesarea Philippi at the source of the river Jordan, where Peter confessed that Jesus is the Messiah. All right, so if you take a look at your map, and you see Lake Tiberias on the top there, which is actually the Sea of Galilee, Caesarea Philippi is right by that place that says UNDOF, UNDOF. I don't know what that is. It's way up north. It's north of the Golan Heights, up there. It's not on here, of course, as I mentioned. There's no longer a city there. It's an ancient city. Caesarea Philippi is named first after the Caesar, but then after the second person whose name is Philip. Now, Philip was a tetrarch. All right, so we hear the word tetra, meaning four, and arch means a ruler in Greek. And so this area was divided into four different areas. You had Caesar, and right below Caesar, he had these four tetrarchs. The most famous of those tetrarchs was Herod the Great. This was the one who was present when Jesus was born. Philip came after Herod. Now Herod went from 40 BC to 4 BC. And Herod was known for some incredible architectural buildings that are still standing today. We're going to go and see these buildings that he commissioned. Now, Herod the Great was a half-breed. His mother was Jewish, and his father was a Roman citizen. And you know, in Judaism, you follow the lineage through the matriarchal line. I think because they're pretty sure who the mom is. The other one might be questionable, right? So you get it through the matriarchal line. So Caesar puts Herod in place here, thinking that the Jews will accept him because he's Jewish, but he's really, his allegiance is over to Rome. He's a perfect kind of in-between guy. Now, when does he die? Do you remember? 4 BC. And he is the one that the Magi come to see at the birth of Jesus. When they see the stars aligning in the sky, they come over to Jerusalem and they go to Herod and say, "Where is the one who was born King of the Jews?" Which is very troubling for King Herod. King Herod was probably pretty good in his earlier years. In his latter years, he became incredibly paranoid, to the point that he killed, I think, 2 of his sons and his wife because he thought they were plotting against him. The joke or the word pun in Greek, it was that it was safer being Herod's pig than it was his son, because the word pig and son in Greek have like 1 word difference between the two. So they made a pun. It was safer to be his pig than his son. So he killed off anybody who looked cross-eyed at him and made any kind of attempt. So that when the Magi come, "Where's the King of the Jews?" it has this one almost throwaway phrase in Luke's gospel. It says, "And Herod was troubled, and everyone else in the city." Because they knew whenever Herod gets upset, somebody's going to die. And sure enough, who died
Babies.
with the birth of Jesus? All the baby boys under the age of 2. Herod dies 4 BC, which means that Jesus was born sometime before Christ. Somebody got the math wrong in the Middle Ages when they did that. So Jesus was probably born anywhere at the earliest, maybe 6 BC. That would be the 2 years, and maybe even longer. Jesus could have been born anywhere between 6 to 10 BC. That's Herod the Great.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scott, did you say that he lived in Jerusalem, Herod?
The palace, yeah. That's why the Magi went there, and that's why the scribes said, "Oh, the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem," because of Micah 5:1 that says, "O Bethlehem, the little least among them, for out of you shall come forth." Yeah, and as you see in your map, Bethlehem and Jerusalem are just very close to each other.
With that scale, it looks like 10 miles?
6.
From 6, I think it was 6.
6 miles?
I think what the movie said 6 last night, I think it was.
No wonder they could walk.
They could walk it. They could walk it. So that's, anyways, how'd we get over there? Caesarea Philippi. Oh, it's because Philippi, as Philip, he was a tetrarch after King Herod. And Philip reigned until about the death of Jesus, about right around 33.
You have to be the center of attention.
So, what's the significance of Caesarea Philippi? Here it is. In Matthew 16, this is the furthest north that we know that Jesus travels. And in Caesarea Philippi, it is even though it's the northern part of the Israeli territory, it is really on the edge. And it's not a Jewish place at all. It's really a cosmopolitan place, heavily full of all the different pagan idols and worships and anything else. Anything you want, you could get in Caesarea Philippi. All right? So it's up there that this story takes place. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And so Jesus is just really asking them at this point, as you're walking the streets, what does the man in the streets say? It's like when Jay Leno used to go out there and interview the people on the street. Who do people say the Son of Man is? And they just respond with what they're hearing. Some say John the Baptist, because there was probably some confusion about who's the greater, John the Baptist or Jesus. John the Baptist, in his column, a plus column, he's older. And John was in the wilderness teaching and preaching. There may even be that Jesus could have been a disciple of John for a while, because he was out there in the wilderness. And it was John who had the fame or notoriety, depending on which side, about everybody coming to him and flocking to him, asking whether or not he was the Messiah. So some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah. And the reason Elijah is because the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, the last chapter, I think it's 5, almost the last verse, it says that Elijah will return before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. That's the last prophecy in the Old Testament. And so there was this anticipation that Elijah would return to usher in that messianic age. That's why a lot of Jewish, very traditional, maybe Hasidic Jews will have that Passover meal, and they will have one chair that's available. And that chair is for Elijah. Somebody's, let me just check here.
You can mute everybody.
That's what I'm trying to do here. All right.
Hey, Scott. You said that was further north that didn't he go to Tyre and Sidon in Lebanon? It was mentioned in somewhere in Matthew that he went that far north.
Tyre? Well, Caesarea Philippi would be a little north of Tyre.
I thought that was over.
Tyre there on the far west.
Right. Well, it was a little bit further north, but
Caesarea is a little further north. All right, so Elijah's going to return before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Remember, Elijah leaves us in a chariot of fire. And the idea is that he's going to return. So they're waiting for him. Some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And at some point, Jesus cuts them off. But what about you? Not the guy in the street, not your church, not your parents, not your pastor. But you, who do you say that I am? And this is the question that each one of us at some time will have to answer. Either on this side or that side of paradise. Each one of us at some point will have to answer this question. But you, who do you say that I am? It is Simon Peter, who usually is the first one to speak, and the first one to put his foot in his mouth, usually. But you are the Christ, or the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And it's like, you got it right, huh? Almost for the first time, way to go, Peter. And Jesus says this, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Of course, Simon is his Hebrew word name. Peter is his Greek name. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by Father in heaven. And I tell you, your name is Peter. And what does Peter mean in Greek?
Rock.
Rock. I tell you, you're rocky. And on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Now, how do we understand that text? It depends if you're Catholic or Protestant. If you're Catholic, you are Peter, and upon this rock that is this person, I'm going to build my church. And they see Peter then as the first pope in the Catholic Church. And so it's upon this line of the papacy that now I'm going to build my church. And of course, we as Protestants, we read that text, we don't think of Peter as the person, of Peter as the confession that you are the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God. It's upon that confession that he's going to build his church. The gates of hell will not overcome it.
That's the rock, that's the foundation.
That's the foundation. Yep. And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This past week, I got an email from a member of the church who lives on at the beach now, just hasn't transferred her membership yet. And she said she was talking to one of her non-denominational friends, and she was telling her friend how much comfort it is on Sunday when they hear the proclamation from the pastor of the forgiveness of sins, and this non-denominational friend was up in arms in that. Only God can forgive sins. Your pastor is not forgiving the sins. And so she quickly emailed me and said, I need something on this one, Scott. And I pointed her to this text, and I pointed her to the text in John chapter 20 after the resurrection, where Jesus again said the same thing. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Whatever you're bound on earth will be bound in heaven. And this is called the office of the keys. The office of the keys. We don't talk about it much in the Protestant church or Lutheran church, but it's certainly part of the ordination. Because the way we understand this is that this is the keys for the ordination. That I am certainly not forgiving your sins. I am pronouncing it because of that phrase, and by his authority, I declare unto you the entire forgiveness of all your sins. If you see the Catholic Church today, they have their emblem for the papacy. You ever seen that before? It is two skeleton keys that are crossed like this, and that refers then to the office of the keys. That's where it comes from. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Why in the world would Jesus say, and keep this quiet? Keep this quiet. Why do you think? Why do you think he must tell people to keep it quiet?
Didn't want to rock the boat. Cause a stir and get the Romans after them.
Okay, so maybe it's about timing. That day will come, but if you disrupt the whole status quo right now, the movement will be squashed prematurely. All right, that's number one. There's like 3 or 4, and scholars kind of debate each one of these. That's number one. What's another one, you suppose?
Not to draw negative attention or to distract what else he was doing. I mean, that would be a hot button issue for a lot of folks who are waiting for Messiah.
Yeah, and waiting for the Messiah, if they were to proclaim the death of Jesus, which doesn't even come up yet.
Yeah.
Doesn't even come, it's the next line, I'm going to show you it. Anything else? Just hold that thought for a second. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples, now listen, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the law. I'm going to be killed. And the third day I'm going to rise again. These were not parables. This was not mysterious language. He said it to them plainly. Now, I get it that for probably all of us, those loved ones in our lives, when they died, they stayed dead, right? And so for Jesus to proclaim that I'm going to come back from the grave, by its very nature, is a scandalous claim, is an unbelievable claim. But there's a second part of it too, that, that doesn't make sense. If you are the Messiah, then the Messiah is to be victorious. They still have this understanding of a military Messiah. You know, from the line of King David, who's going to be coming in to be able to secure the borders once again. So either way, the fact that he's going to suffer and die and rise again doesn't make sense. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And then Jesus turns and he calls Peter a name. Jesus is a name caller. And he calls him the worst name in the book, of course. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have the mind, the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, why would Jesus explode that quickly and that vehemently by calling one of his closest disciples the worst name in the book?
You wanted to squash that kind of thinking?
Squash the kind of thinking. Push that a little bit further. I gotta think that it might be tempting for Jesus. Right. In the Garden of Gethsemane. God, if there's any other way that we can do this, let's use that. That was the temptation in the wilderness, wasn't it? To find some other way other than a cross to be able to fulfill God's plan. So in this moment here, it's not that Peter's a bad guy and Jesus is calling him a name. At that point, probably Satan is working through the bumblings of Peter to hit Jesus precisely at his weakest point, the temptation to avoid a cross. Which you've got to understand would be all of our greatest temptations, no? To find a different way. Now, let's go back. We'll go back one. The very end, then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. And then he explains about what it means to be the Messiah. Nothing about white steeds and nothing about reestablishing the throne and nothing about getting rid of the Romans. It seems like a losing proposition here. So, why does he tell them? Maybe timing is going to disrupt it. Maybe, what else? The second thought that scholars say is that Jesus as the Messiah doesn't make sense until after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, it just doesn't make sense. Remember in Mark's Gospel, the death of Jesus. The death of Jesus has 7 last words, right? But they're not contained in one gospel. They're in all 4 gospels. It's a compilation of all those. But in Mark's Gospel, in John's Gospel, Jesus is this victorious, I'm in control Messiah. In John's Gospel, Jesus goes toe-to-toe with Pontius Pilate, arguing with him, coming up and down with him. In John's Gospel, Jesus kicks that cross upon his shoulder and he carries it himself up to Golgotha. Whereas in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Simon of Cyrene carries it. In John's Gospel, Jesus almost nails himself on the cross and gets up there. And when he's up there, he's still in control. Woman, here's your son. Son, here's your mother. Telling John to take care of Mary. Then it says, I'm thirsty. Not because he was thirsty, but it says in order to fulfill scripture. In the whole time, and at the end, it says, and then Jesus, very clearly, gave up his spirit. Nobody took it from him. Jesus gave up his spirit. He's in control to the very end. Contrast that with Mark. Mark is the first gospel written. And in Mark's gospel, Jesus dies a tragic death, misunderstood by everybody. In Mark's gospel, one of the first words that he says there is, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? In Hebrew, El, as in Eloi, El means God. Oi is the first person possessive. My God, Eloi. But if you're dying on a cross and you're barely whispering and you're dehydrated and your pain is literally excruciating, he says Eloi, and the people say, wait. He's calling on Elijah. Remember, Elijah is supposed to come before the great and terrible day of the Lord. He's calling upon Elijah, which is kind of like Eloi. And if you're dying and you're just breathing, Eloi, Elijah, Eloi, it could be close, huh? Here, he's calling Elijah. Let's give him some vinegar on the sponge and see if we can keep him alive a little longer to see if Elijah will come. What a horrible and cruel thing they do to a dying man. They try to extend his life just a little longer. And then he finally dies. Tragically, a misunderstood man. His very last words on the cross, and they still don't get what he's saying. And what happens right after he dies?
It's an earthquake and the veil hanging in the temple.
The curtain. All right? So the curtain, and that is the Holy of Holies. And the temple is kind of designed in concentric, not circles, but more like squares. Gentile women, Gentile men, Jewish women, Jewish men, priests, and then once a year on Yom Kippur, the high priest and the high priest alone goes into the Holy of Holies to make atonement for the sins of the people. And certainly God is everywhere. But inside the Holy of Holies is what?
The altar and the ark.
The Ark of the Covenant. And what's inside the Ark of the Covenant?
And the tablets and
the cane.
And the rod of Aaron.
The rod of Aaron, that's right. The tablets of the Ten Commandments, the rod of Aaron that is still blossoming. And the jar of manna that's still preserved. God's everywhere, but God is intensely present in the Holy of Holies. And so when the priest goes in there, they actually tie a rope around his ankle so that if he drops dead in the very presence of God, somebody can drag him out. The point is this, and the Holy of Holies has a curtain around it. And the stories behind the curtain is that it is so big, and it is so massive, and it is so heavy. It took 4 horses using a pulley system to raise it up to encircle the Ark of the Covenant. And that's the Holy of Holies. It's big, it's heavy, it's massive. But when Jesus dies in Mark's Gospel, how is the curtain torn? Top to bottom. Now the details matter, right? He actually said, not just is torn, but it's not torn from the bottom to the top, as if humanity were storming into the very presence of God to take over. It's torn from the top to the bottom, which suggests what?
God tore it.
God is revealing himself, who he really is. He's not in some box that only the high priest enter into and only once a year. God is revealing himself as the one who is crucified. This is how we come to know God, through the crucifixion of Jesus. And the very next words, the very next verse, somebody speaks. The centurion, the one who nailed him on the cross, perhaps, the one who's guarding the crucifixion, the centurion speaks.
Surely this must have been the Son of God.
Surely this man was the Son of God. And up to this point in Mark's Gospel, especially, everybody, including the disciples, are babbling idiots and have no idea who this Jesus is, even though he speaks to them clearly. The only ones who know who Jesus is in Mark's Gospel are the demons. And when he calls them out, they tremble, they shriek. They knew who he is. And the only other one in Mark's Gospel who knows who he is, besides the demons, is a pagan, Roman, Gentile centurion who only sees Jesus as the crucified one. So why does Jesus say, don't tell anyone? Number one, it might just mess up the timeline and the procedure that could be. Number two, probably it doesn't make sense until after the cross and the resurrection. It doesn't make sense. So wait. This will make sense to you later. Just wait. There's a third theory. I'm liking the second one the best. But the third theory is when, after the death, after the resurrection, the disciples go out and teach, preach, and baptize in all the world, and the people are saying, how come I've never heard of this person, Jesus? I mean, if he is the Son of God. And the answer is, well, he told us to be very quiet about it until after his resurrection. Those are three different theories. It's called the Messianic secret. A Messianic secret. Now we go back here. Get behind me, Satan, stumbling block. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. And we talked about that on Sunday. About that can't be an easy walk, can it? It can't be an easy walk. Now, Jesus is probably not telling us that you're going to have to be nailed on a cross, as I was, and die. But what might he be saying when he says, take up your cross and follow me? What might that be referring to?
And we have to die to self or put the old man to death to rise to new life. I mean, that's sort of the picture of baptism.
That's the first thing about putting the old to death. The old Adam, the old Eve. Put that old self to death. When a person's baptized, when they go into the water, or sprinkled over the top, either way, they die with Jesus on the cross. And when they come up out of the water, the sprinkling's done, it is their Easter morning. So it is the death and the resurrection. That's number one. And number two, the cross always means self-sacrifice. Always means self-sacrifice. And Jesus says, no greater love has anyone than this, they lay down their life for the sake of the other. Sometimes literally, most of the time metaphorically. What do we need to lay down for the sake of the other person? All right. That's what we're going to see in Caesarea Philippi. But there's no specific building or site. It is just there's going to be rubble there. But it will be that area in which this is the first time. This is the first time that Jesus is declaring the confession about who he is. Anything else in Matthew 16? Let's go back. All right, and we visit Caesarea Philippi, source of the River Jordan, where Peter confesses. Then we return to the Sea of Galilee via the Golan Heights. All right, the Golan Heights has absolutely no significance in the Bible, but it does for Israel. Now look where the Golan Heights is located on your map, the far north. The far north. Now, it was part of Syria until 1967, and then after the Six-Day War, Israel took it on and occupied it, but it wasn't officially part of Israel until 1981. And, you know, Syria never really recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel, but still their territory occupied by somebody else. I suppose it may be not too different from Ukraine and Russia. And Russia just says, well, this has always been our land. And then Syria tried to recapture it in 1973. And after 74, it's been pretty quiet. Now, the reason that it's important for Israel is what? Strategically, where it's located, what's the most important reason for Israel to have this?
So, I mean, the heights that overlook Israel and they can be attacked from up there? Is it a security kind of thing?
I think security. It's a buffer. Whatever buffer that they can create with these other states that have vowed to kill them, whatever buffer is probably to their advantage. If Golan was taken over by Syria, I think they were assuming that Syria would put their missiles, you know, a mile off the border, and there would be no time to take cover once those things are launched. All right, but in the Bible, no real significance. With a stop overlook the road to Damascus. All right, let's go back to your map. And you see the map there on the very top. Let me go to the map here with everybody else here. Oops, go forward. Oh, I think I already have it. Good. I'm gonna stop sharing. Now I gotta share. All right. So you see Damascus right up there, the far north. This is the most famous place because of Paul. Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. And evidently the Christian community was growing so quickly, particularly in the north, because, you know, Galilee was kind of the hub right there, that it reached all the way up to Damascus. And the significance of Damascus has to do with Paul. So let me go back here, share screen. Oops. All right, so here it is, the road to Damascus. Meanwhile, Saul, that's his Hebrew name, Paul being his Greek name. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples, he went to the high priest and asked for him letters to the synagogues in Damascus. Let's stop there a second. The synagogues in Damascus. At this point, how many different sects of Judaism were there? You know, the Pharisees, and this was a lay movement. These were actually the good guys. Remember last week we talked about Hanukkah in 167 BC, and the candles that kept on burning. This was the time of the Pharisees. because there was such a resurgence to get back to the basics of the Bible. And it was led not by the clergy, but by a lay movement in about 160, 170 BC. And so for 100 years, the Pharisees were the good guys. They were the ones that got everybody back into Judaism after the adulteration from the Syrian Empire. But over about 100 years, 150 years, this power begins to corrupt them. And they go from a lay movement to this self-righteous movement. And they have 613 laws in Judaism. And the idea was that if anyone in this Pharisaic movement could fulfill all 613 laws in one day, the Messiah would come. And so they had their run-of-the-mill Pharisees, but then they had this special class, Uber Pharisees. I don't know what the Hebrew is for that one. Uber Pharisees. That's why Paul says that before his conversion, remember he said, I was from the tribe of Benjamin. And then he says, I was a Pharisee among Pharisees. A Pharisee among Pharisees, which suggests that he was part of that Uber class that was really trying to usher in the kingdom of God through their righteous living. All right, we have to go through the sects of Judaism. Pharisees, second one, Sadducees. Sadducees were the clerics. They were overseeing the Sanhedrin, which was that ruling class. These were the clerics. And the difference is that the Pharisees had actually a little bit more of a liberal theology in that they believed in the afterlife. The Sadducees were the strict fundamentalists. If it's not in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, if it's not the Torah, we don't believe it. Therefore, the Sadducees were the ones who did not believe in the resurrection. That's why they were sad, you see.
That's a dad joke.
That's a dad joke, huh? That's separate. These are the Sadducees that went to Jesus and tried to stump him. And they said, a man had 7 wives. So he was married, died, married again, died.
The other way around. She had 7 husbands.
Oh, that's it. The woman had 7 husbands. Yes, thank you, John. And one died after another. And the Sadducees tried to stump him and said, now, who will be her husband in heaven? I mean, they wanted to show the ludicrous nature of the resurrection. Of course, Jesus' answer was, it's not the same kind of relationship in heaven as it is in earth that you got around it. But that was their basic theology. All right, so you had Pharisees. You had the Sadducees. You had the scribes. They were part of the scribes and Pharisees. They were kind of together there. They were the legal ones. The Essenes. The Essenes were the ones out in the desert with John the Baptist. These were the ones who went out into the wilderness to usher in the kingdom of God. Today, you have those people that put on white robes and go up to the mountaintop and wait for the mothership to come and get them. These were the Essenes. They thought life was so awful that they were going to retreat into the wilderness. They had their own little enclave. Interestingly, they met just outside of the Jordan River, which was the place where Moses and then Joshua brought in the people into the promised land. And so they figured this would be the place where God would usher in, right? And so they're the Essenes, but they're the separated ones. There was a fourth one that you probably don't know about, but you've heard about, the Zealots. Simon the Zealot, one of the disciples. These were the guerrilla warfare. These were the ones who were trying to take out Rome by subversive means. All right, here's my point. When it says here, ask him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, why are they going to the synagogues? Aren't there Jews in the synagogues? And he's trying to capture the Christians? At this point, they're all together. All the different sects of Judaism are still together. Oh, they're separated. But in the Roman eyes, it's one religion. Whatever you want to call yourself, Presbyterian or Baptist or Lutheran, it's one religion. They have different denominations. And now suddenly with Jesus, there's a fifth group of Jews called the
Way.
Christians.
They're called the Way, as exactly it. They're called the Messianic Jews too. And so they are worshiping alongside all the other Jews, but also having their worship again on Sunday. Their Sabbath on Saturday, and then they worship on Sunday, the day of the resurrection. The significance of that is at some point, someone in the synagogue looks at them and says, "You're not Jewish. You don't believe what we believe." And they kick them out of the synagogue. Now, that doesn't happen until about 90 AD. How many years do the Messianic Jews live within the womb of Judaism before they're recognized and kicked out? About 60 years, maybe 50 years. Which is significant because really Rome doesn't really ramp up its persecution against Christians until after the Jews kick them out. And Rome realizes that this is a separate religion. And we don't allow any other religion except emperor worship and Judaism in our country. That's when the persecutions begin. So that's why he goes into the synagogues, because they're intermingled within the synagogues. So if any of them were found belonging to the Way, that's the very first designation of Christianity, people of the Way. Whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord?" This is a little difficult to interpret. Lord. Because in the Greek, it can be Lord as in the Lord our God, or it can be Lord as in Sir. My Lord, Sir. And so we're not sure how Saul is meaning that right here. Certainly there is fear and reverence. Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. Interesting, when you persecute a child of God, you are persecuting Jesus. Jesus says, "You're persecuting me. Now get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do." Men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind, did not eat or drink anything. Who does he meet in Damascus? Remember the guy's name? Nope.
No.
Oh.
I'll tell you. Chapter 9. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. Oh, you knew that, right? It was right there.
I knew the way.
The Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias. And he said, here I am, Hineni. And the Lord said to him, rise, go to the street called Straight, and inquire into the house of Judas a man of Tarsus named Saul, for behold, he is praying. And he has seen a man named Ananias come in and lay hands on him, so that he may regain his sight. God tells Ananias to go and meet Paul, while Paul is having a vision about Ananias coming to see him. It's all coming together. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, and how much evil he has done to the saints in Jerusalem. He has the authority from the chief priest to come and bind up everyone who calls upon your name. That's a hard ask of Ananias, to go to this one who's persecuting the Christians and help him. But the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and the kings and the sons of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. And he does. He does. Think about all that Paul went through. There's this verse, I think it's in 2 Corinthians towards the end. He says something like, 4 times I have been beaten 39 lashes. 2 times I've been clubbed. 1 time I've been shipwrecked. I've been lost at sea. I felt hunger and pain. I mean, he suffers greatly. There's one time that Paul is stoned, we think, to death, and they leave him outside the gates, and he gets up, dusts himself off, and he walks right back into the city. Oh, he must suffer much. And the end of one of his letters, I can't remember which one, it says, do you see with which large letters I am writing this by my own hand? Now, Paul had a scribe that did most of his writing. But there's one, he says, I want you to know this is by my own hand, large letters. Now, it could be that Paul is getting older and his eyesight is dimming. But he's not that old. He's not that old. Or it could be that his hands have been so mangled, destroyed, broken, that he really can't even grip a pen. And he has to write with large letters. He must suffer. So Ananias departed, entered the house, and laying his hands on him said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road by which you came, has sent me that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately something that like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. He arose, was baptized, took food, and was strengthened. And then he went out and began his missionary journeys. There's a gap of about 11 years from here, from that road to Damascus, about 11 years before he begins his missionary journeys. Why? Well, he has to change his reputation among the Christians. Who's going to believe him when he walks into synagogues and says, I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help you? It takes 11 years. And during that time, then, he is gaining trust, but also probably learning and working with the leadership. Paul
changed his name?
What's that?
Is that when he changed his name from Saul?
Well, everybody here had a Greek and a Hebrew name.
Okay, all right.
So it wasn't changed. It depends on which context. Yeah. Paul is a contemporary of Jesus. But there is no indication prior to the road to Damascus that they ever met. Now, we like to think that Jesus was the most popular person in the first century, but the reality is it was probably a very small crowd. I mean, when we do the Palm Sunday and the waving of the palm branches, and we read the story, we like to think that there was a crowd of thousands of people welcoming him into Jerusalem. Probably not. Probably not. Probably a smaller one that went, for the most part, unobserved by most people. Paul, however, had the equivalent of 2 PhDs. He was probably the most educated, learned man in Judaism of his time. And then he's converted. So God uses one that was so entrenched in Judaism, not only for his education, but also by his murderous threats, and uses him to be able to reach people that otherwise would not hear. And it's ironic, huh? That when Paul goes on these missionary journeys, he first goes to the synagogues, always, but they rarely receive him. The Jews rarely receive him. Instead, he goes to the Gentiles. And so he's known then as the missionary to the Gentiles. Even though Peter is the one who had that vision, get up, kill, eat, clean and unclean. And Peter is the one who first baptizes a Gentile person. It's Paul who really does it. And when he goes out on these missionary journeys, he comes back to the boys in Jerusalem. Who's leading the group in Jerusalem in the early church?
Was it James? James was running the thing.
Yep. James, the brother of Jesus. So there was a little bit of a power struggle between James and Peter. But who's going to be the true leader? Peter. But when Paul comes back from his missionary journeys and he meets with the boys in Jerusalem, they're still assuming if you want to become Christian, though they're not called Christian yet. If you want to become Messianic, you have to first become Jewish, which means we have some dietary laws, we have some festivals.
Circumcision.
We have circumcision. And as Paul's going out there in the hinterlands, they're not too interested in circumcision. They like their BLT. They don't want to change that either. And they got their own festivals. But I like this Jesus guy, and I'll be baptized. So Paul comes back and says, it's not working out there. This is what's working. And so the boys in Jerusalem finally get together and say, I love this line, it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us that God is doing something new. It seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us that God is doing something new. It says, okay, Paul, go on out there. They don't have to be circumcised. They don't have to have all these dietary laws. We just have 2 requirements. Anybody know what the 2 requirements were?
Abstain from eating meat from idols.
Abstain from eating meat to idols. And sexual purity. Yeah. And even that first one, they kept the second. Even that first one, by the time Corinthians comes, Paul is saying, eat it or don't eat it. It doesn't make any difference. It's a hunk of stone. It's a piece of wood when they're sacrificing this meat to idols. Go ahead and eat. See, what happens is that after the sacrifice, they have to eat it. So it's either in the deli you know, saying this one was sacrificed to Eros, this one was sacrificed to Mars, this one was sacrificed, or you go to your neighbor's house and they say, isn't this the best meat that was sacrificed to Aphrodite? And then what do these Jewish people do? Do they say no? Do I go to a different deli and suddenly then I am ostracized? And now suddenly nobody wants to do business with me because I won't do business with them. You see, it's an economic issue. Till finally Paul says, gets rid of that first requirement of that the boys in Jerusalem, gets rid of that and says, no, it doesn't matter. Eat the meat or don't eat the meat. Doesn't matter. But, remember this line? If it causes one of the younger or the younger brethren to stumble, then don't eat it. And not because it's right or wrong, but for the sake of the conscience of the other. Then don't eat it. If it's going to make this person struggle and fall in their faith, then don't do it. See if I have anything else. This is for next week. This is the beginning for next week. All right. Follow-up questions. We're going to take this day by day as we walk through this whole. We're still in the north, and so next week we're going to be looking at the Sea of Galilee. And you know, this is where the calming of the storm. This is where the calling of the disciples, primarily most of the disciples. And this is kind of home base. Periodically, they go down to Jerusalem, like during the festivals, but primarily they're up in that northern part. The northern part's called Galilee. Galilee. Anything else? All right. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. I want to thank you all for joining us here online. I know that it's a little more difficult to be online, but I appreciate you sticking with it and being a part of it. All right, we'll see you next week. And we're going to send out an email to everybody with the link from last week and this week in case you missed any of the recordings. All right? We'll see you.
Hey, Scott.